everyone. Welcome. It's Dr. Naomi Wolf, and I'm here very honored to be welcoming Dr. Ben Tapper. Welcome, Dr. Tapper.
Thanks, Naomi. It's good to be here.
Thank you. So Dr. Ben Tapper graduated from Palmer College of Chiropractic. He studied vaccinations and adverse reactions for over 20 years, and he's put on vaccine lectures for the past decade. He's an expert in epigenetics and the wellness model paradigm and executive producer of The Time Is Now. So we're so thrilled to have you. And as the audience knows, Brian O'Shea, Intel analyst, Disclosure, my husband, and his co-host, JJ Carroll, who spent his career as a border agent, have a podcast called Unrestricted Invasion. And the premise is that this nation is having a war waged against it. And I wanted to have them both on this podcast so that we could ask Dr. Tapper, based on that hypothesis, what if medically, what if all hell breaks loose? What if we've got a situation in which the grid is down, or that signal has been given and there's rioting in the streets in the cities, and you're in the country and your family has a puncture wound, or someone's got a fever and it's not going down, or there's been a bug bite or a tick bite and you can't get to the hospital because it's just chaos. So let me start with that. Dr. Tapper, what do you tell people when, or has this not come up, this hypothetical of the systems are down, you can't get to a hospital, what do you advise? And specifically, what is the medical kit that you all are producing do to empower people in a situation like that?
Well, if we, God forbid, if we are ever in a situation like that, the number one thing is to stay calm, first and foremost, and not to let our emotions get the best of us. In every emergency crisis, we need to stay calm and have a level head. But really, these emergency kits are designed with that in mind. We're there to give us that peace of mind, because we need to prepare and plan for the worst and hope for the best, right? And just the key is being prepared here. And I mean, Benjamin Franklin said an ounce of preparation and prevention is worth a pound of cure. So we need to be ready for the worst of the worst. And I think in a time of crisis, having these in your back pocket, I pray we never need it, but it's there to cover every element of an emergency crisis situation. I mean, we have 4 different kits here through the Wellness Company, and each one is a little bit different. But, the travel kit, I have 4 kids. And we go into places where we are like miles and miles in town. I trout fish every year, and I take my boy, and we are, hours from any grocery store, any, Walgreens or anything like that. So having these kits there will give us a peace of mind, and just they have different bandages in there, different things for, wounds. It can really stop things from getting a lot worse. So having a travel kit or an emergency kit in there, having different medical supplies in there will give you that peace of mind when you need it. So I think it's absolutely essential especially for preparation.
That's really important to hear. Well, let me turn to Brian first. From your experience in scary situations, conflict areas, what are the kinds, or just from your analysis with JJ of, what's happening in our country, what are the kinds of risks, injuries, physical challenges that you're worried about? Like, what would you want to ask Dr. Tapper, or
Sure.
more what has in it? What's your scenario?
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to meet you, Dr. Tapper. That is a fine beard you have there. So, but I couldn't agree with Dr. Tapper more. Staying calm was the biggest thing we learned. I spent 11 years in active duty military, most of that time with 1st Special Forces. So we dealt with Southeast Asia. Point of that is there's a lot of nasty things in Southeast Asia. So before we would go out, we would have shots of like Japanese encephalitis type stuff, and stuff for typhoid, and lots of doxycycline always carried with us, because it tends to, and stop me if I'm wrong, doctor, wipe out everything. But having it with you is the most important thing, because time is critical. So, for example, just here in upstate New York, there's so many ticks, and I believe it's like 48 hours before like Lyme disease is there to stay. So if you get bit by a tick, having something like doxycycline with you, whether it's a war or not, being able to get that without wasting time having to go to online telecare and get a prescription. And then, as Naomi found out from one of our neighbors, they wouldn't even give her daughter doxycycline. They wanted her to try out something new they were pushing. So just in everyday circumstances, that's the key thing. But what I like about these kits is the instructions, and JJ just got his. He's very happy about that. But having it with you, but also having the knowledge of how to use it, and keeping a cool head in knowing how to use it.
Yep. Wow. Yeah. And is there anything that you would add to that, Dr. Tapper, from your knowledge of like preventing infection, the antibiotic use? Like how would someone use antibiotics in a situation like Brian just described, using your medical kit?
Right. So, one of those things, to give an example, I go back to my own personal story. When I used, like a life-saving antibiotic, they can be absolutely life-saving in times. Like my boy, we were out in Colorado in the mountains. My boy spiked a super, super, super high fever. And normally I wouldn't interfere with fevers, but we did a sinus rinse the day before we left. And I was concerned about almost that infection spreading because he had a sinus infection that was going kind of viral. And so thank the Lord we had an antibiotic at time. That was one of those scenarios where we used that, but knowing when and when not to use that antibiotic, but it can really prevent some different things. Let's say you got a scrape on the leg and you go swimming in a pond and you get some kind of bacterial infection in there. These kits have those antibiotics in there, or even a topical antibiotic. If you do scrape your leg, it can really prevent from getting worse, or even having an emergency hospital situation or a life or death situation. I mean, that's something that you can really use to prevent. Let's say you're out hiking, you scrape your leg, and that infection, you get a red streak that's going towards the heart. If that reaches the heart, that can be an absolutely fatal situation. And most people don't even realize that. But if you have these kits in there, that can prevent you, and it can save your life, literally. Wow. And that's what these are. That's what these are designed for. Because if there is a time when we have an emergency crisis and all hell breaks loose in our hospitals and our urgent care situations, I don't think it's a matter of if, I think it's a matter of when. You're not going to be able to get in there, and you're not going to be a priority because they're going to be overrun. So these kits are literally life-saving kits that can be there in the time of place when you need it. It's like, I endorse a Second Amendment. God forbid I never want to use my gun, but I have it just in case. And I'd rather have it and never use it and not have it and need it. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where that's what I view these kits as. They're just a life-saving situation kit to have and to give you that peace of mind.
Right. Well, that makes sense. And I'm just reflecting as you're speaking, both of you, on, in the 19th century, that's how people died, right? Infections that they couldn't bring down, antibiotics are an absolute godsend. And what a difference that would make. The other thing I was thinking of when you're speaking, Dr. Tapper, is, we have kind of had a situation like that because during COVID, I don't know, during the pandemic, I tend to use quote marks because, my research shows we don't know how solid those data are. We don't know how extensive it was, but people were being turned away from the hospital and they were being sent home with bad respiratory infections. Would your kit deal with something like that? If God forbid people had a respiratory infection, they weren't getting better, it was getting worse, bronchitis, pneumonia, what should people do with your kit in that situation?
So in that regard, the Contagion kit is one of my favorite kits because it has what I call vitamin I, the ivermectin, and also hydroxychloroquine in there with a nebulizer. Any respiratory, I'm a huge fan, and I endorse nebulizers. I think that's the key there. Using that nebulizer with the other medications in that kit, I think is the key there. So the Contagion kit, if you're worried about respiratory issues, I think the Contagion kit's going to be what you should use and have at home. And with the nebulizer, I think that's going to be the best bet to wipe that out.
Gotcha. So really, if we were being super prudent, it wouldn't be either or, it would be both, right? The most prepared household would have both the medical kit and the Contagion kit. Right?
I would say all four is your best bet because they all have different things in them. The medical emergency kit doesn't have the hydroxychloroquine, but the Contagion kit does with the nebulizer. And even the travel kit, you're going to have, versus the emergency kit, just the one that's the red kit going to have more medical supplies in there. So I think all four would be your best bet to have. Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, JJ, let me turn to you. You struck me when I first found out about your work, because you were describing this absolutely chaotic situation we have already of millions and millions of people coming in over our southern border. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is the fact that these millions of people, many of them come from countries that have infectious diseases that we are not used to here, or that we think are gone. So what are some of the infectious diseases or conditions, right, that you've seen that that you're concerned about when you think about just the medical situation of so many people from so many different parts of the world coming in over the border?
Well, if we go back prior to the pandemic and knowing what COVID was, this was the beginning of the caravans, and our cells were packed, and we were holding people for 30 days. And we were taking, I was in charge of second charge of a station, and I was having every day at least 10 to 15 individuals were going to the local emergency room just north of San Diego, big facility. They stopped us from going, and they set up a triage outside the emergency room. And I called and said, well, wait a minute. Why are my agents not allowed to bring the people into your emergency room? This is not safe to go in the back and have some triage. And they said, sir, we have no idea what they have. We can't figure it out, but we don't want them anywhere near the American citizens population. And I remember thinking, what is going on? And I got COVID, and before we ever knew what COVID was, and it was debilitating. I remember thinking, I feel like I'm going to die. But we received it from all the illegal aliens coming in, because they live outside. They live next to each other outside for weeks on end. So when you start talking about disease, we have drug-resistant tuberculosis. You have full-blown AIDS. Like, never even heard of AIDS still, right? I mean, HIV, but we had full-blown AIDS, scabies, lice, every skin disease you can imagine. It was frightening. And then, doctor, just to touch on what you said about ivermectin and the other issues, I had COVID in a second lapse of it when I was in South Dakota in a small rural area. But I could have used those medicines to stop it from getting worse, but I had nothing. And you talk about shortages of supplies. I lived in a very red state where Governor Nome really ticked off Biden. Biden shut down the flow of all of the abilities and medicines to help, and all was left was remdesivir. I had no idea. I thought I was going to die. I went to the hospital for 7 days, and they pumped me full of remdesivir 3 different times.
Oh my gosh!
I'm reading now that I should be dead.
Yep, you're lucky
right,
to be alive.
just one time, but they pumped me 3 times for that.
What would you say to that, Dr. Tapper? What would you say to
well, thank the Lord, JJ, that you're here. I think the Lord had a plan to keep you alive. There's a lot of people out there that did not make it through, and I've always said that the protocols were what was killing people. I mean, if you look at the history of remdesivir, it has a track record of causing renal failure. I mean, it had a warning, basically a drug warning prior, and it's been pulled off the market for these organ failures. I mean, it has a history of causing problems, and I think the implementation of that being in the drug as choice for the protocols during COVID was really by design. You know, remdesivir was designed and implemented at a certain key point in the pandemic, and I believe it was by design. It was there. It was causing more problems, and the protocols were what was killing people during the pandemic. I mean, so it's by the grace of God you pulled through that, because someone on remdesivir 3 times, it's critically. I mean, at that point, because there's been a history of renal failure with this drug, and so. You know, my mom was having a diabetic episode, and she went to the hospital. No fever. There's no symptomatology that would correlate to any kind of flu or any kind of respiratory issue. She just had a diabetic spell. She went to the hospital, and I'm in a different state, but I called my dad and I said, you have to get up there ASAP, because they're going to try to put her remdesivir, guaranteed. And that's what they tried to do. And I guarantee you that would have killed my mom. I had 2 patients that went the remdesivir route and they had organ failure. And guess what? They died. They didn't pull through. So does corona cause renal failure? Absolutely not. But remdesivir does. So you asked my opinion. There needs to be an investigation on who is putting out the protocols for COVID, because I know full well they were designed to cause harm. And if you look at the death count after COVID, you can see that this remdesivir and these faulty protocols were absolutely causing astronomical harm to our people, and it needs to be investigated.
Various diseases coming in over the border, including the ones, that we don't recognize. I mean, they're not familiar to us because they're different diseases all over the world that, our doctors may not recognize, which is scary enough. But just let's talk about like tuberculosis that's drug resistant, or all of these skin conditions that JJ was talking about. I mean, people are flooding in to close quarters. Like I see, people like barely over the border, packed in buses or packed in airplanes, or, in your child's school, right? And those are infectious conditions, right? So will you talk about tuberculosis and skin conditions specifically?
I mean, that's a scary thought. I mean, I think you're going to see things, especially with this border crisis, you're going to see things that you would normally see in developing countries come our way.
Yeah.
So I think it's a real concern. I think that should raise the importance of being prepared and having, these emergency kits on hand, these medical kits that have covered every single element of that. They have different topical antibiotics and different prescriptions in it that can be life-saving, or with the case of these skin lesions or different things that we've seen, because I think you're going to see more and more of this. And, it is a concern of mine, and it is concerning. So really to be, to have that peace of mind, we need to be prepared. But again, I think we are hearing whispers of this now, and I think it's going to be more prevalent as the days come. So it is concerning.
Right. And so if, God forbid, your child comes home from school or from a bus trip, or, your partner comes home with scabies, I mean, what JJ was talking about, or ringworm, right? These horrible third world conditions that are now in our country, right, with this new population. Right. Do the medical kits have topical creams that can help with that?
Yes, they do. There's topical kits. There's 15 to 20 different medications that have topical creams and different prescriptions in there, and over-the-counter creams that can really be helpful and beneficial in that area. Not only that, even in the parasitics, I mean, if you look at ivermectin, really what it was designed for, it was actually anti-parasitic in nature. Same with hydroxychloroquine. These are anti-parasitic medications that can really help too, just in case we have parasites that come across that we haven't seen before. And so that's a real reality too, because in some of these developing countries, parasites play a bigger role than what we have here in the States. And you're going to see things like that we might not have ever seen before. So parasites scare me more than anything, to be honest.
Really?
And I think some of these ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine can really be helpful.
Could you talk a little bit in our remaining minutes about parasites? Because JJ, I'm guessing that both Brian and JJ's experience, you've been warned about or dealt with parasites. Is that correct? Brian, when you were in the field, were you warned about parasites in the water?
Yeah, I mean, ours in a different sense. So we spent a lot of time in the Philippines, in southern Philippines. And the biggest threat there was getting knifed and getting stabbed or slashed. And the way they do it down there is they have the barrio blades or the karambits that come out like this, like a hook. And they would rub them in dog feces on the ground, and then and they don't need to kill you. They just need to puncture you. And what scares me about that is the type of groups coming in, especially from like Haiti and certain of the island nations. The weapon of choice is, the machete. You see a lot of machete attacks with MS-13. And there's a lot more stabbings I'm seeing in the news and in schools. And there's a lot fewer emergency medical personnel to respond to that. So I think just having, just some first aid skills, but also the antibiotics to treat those, and the first aid gear to treat that on hand, you'll probably save your kid's life or your own.
Right. That's a good point. Did you want to say something to that, Dr. Tapper, about puncture wounds and stab wounds?
I mean, it's just things happen in life, right? We have unexpected things happen. And I just can't stress enough the importance of being prepared. I mean, we are these conversations that we're having more and more of these conversations. 6 years ago, these conversations, this would have been an abnormal conversation, but now it's at the forefront of society. This is a normal conversation, and more conversations are had around this topic of emergency or just being prepared or what's going to happen with the grid. We have more diseases now than ever before. All these people passing into our society across the border. How many immunocompromised people are there right now that are passing on these diseases? And if you're immunocompromised, guess what? You're going to have more vulnerability of parasitic infections and everything else that are going to come our way. So having that preparation and being prepared with these kits is the absolute wise thing to do. So I can't stress that enough, and just being prepared, because we cannot, what we learned over Corona baloney is we can't trust our medical establishment to take care of us in a time of crisis, especially if these things are overrun right now. So we need to be prepared.
For sure. JJ, can I ask you about parasites? I mean, when you were working with these populations coming in over the border, was that a concern at all? Or?
It was always a concern because we were physically handling people, right? When you arrest them or you zip tie them, you have to physically touch them. And just no matter how much precautions you take, you're going to touch your face, your clothes, you're going to bring it home. It was never, whenever I was running my stations or my units, it was always the unknown. Mm-hmm. It was not, was so just the outward appearance of these individuals, the skin diseases, that was frightening enough. But we all knew intellectually, dear God, what is underlying all of this, or what do we not know? Where somebody looks, and you're rolling around, you're fighting them, their skin's touching your skin, and it's a horrible situation. But something that we're talking about today, and I think is very relevant, is look what's happening to New York City. Right. You're going to see the truckers are going to stop. Let's just say they stop medicine transport and food transport by just 20%, 25%. That's a crisis level. What if they stop 75%, 80% for a week, 2 weeks, a month? Holy cow. We're talking about major issue, because you have 8 million people jammed in to that small place, and they have no medical. I mean, the medical go like that if they don't have 24-hour replenishing that, right? So within a week, you're depleted of everything.
And I would even say sanitation services too.
Say that again.
The sanitation services will be suspended in those cases as well. They're union as well.
Totally. 100%. And I'm thinking about the 70s when there was a sanitation strike, and you couple all of those together, bad sanitation, new diseases, new parasites, empty shelves at CVS. It is absolutely a catastrophe. Well, let me turn to Dr. Tapper. How do parasites get spread? Like that scenario that JJ was describing, where people are kind of, coming into contact with each other. Is that how you spread parasites, or like?
There's different. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of different parasites out there, and there can be parasitic transmission. I believe the most common is through food, poor food sanitation, or just, and it can come in close proximity as well, different fluid transformation. But, that's why we need to be cautious, especially with someone that might be suspected of that. But really, you look at developing countries, I believe the number one transmission is poor food quality and food sources. But again, it can be close contact transmission. So, yep.
And again, the kit, one of those kits is going to have what you need to kill the parasite. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, just by ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine in itself, and there are other medications that can play a role in that. But yes, and the kits, emergency kit and the contagion kit, are absolutely going to have that. I mean, because hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin they're both parasitic in nature, so that can help. It also can help with that's been a very effective treatment in helping COVID and different respiratory issues. But it's one of those things where the main premise of that medication is an absolute anti-parasitic.
Wow. And that's what ivermectin was used for in the rest of the world, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
All the more reason to revive it now. Well, in our last few minutes, what do you want people to know, Dr. Tapper, that we haven't covered in terms of, if everything goes, worse? Like we're already on this slope.
Right. I don't think it's a matter of if it's going to get worse. I think it's a matter of when. And we are in a very volatile state right now in this country. And I just pray that people realize that and wake up. I mean, we have a lot of globalist agendas being coming down our way, especially with this the World Health Organization's pandemic treaty coming our way. That's a real concern. So, we need to really fight back and push back. And I just pray that people support the wellness company and being prepared, because the wellness company, they're doing big things here and trying to pave the way and really give people the options outside of the mainstream here, and really trying to pioneer a field in case of emergencies and crisis. But really, again, I just don't want to. I want to stress too the fear issue. We shouldn't give in to fear. I mean, I think it was Roosevelt that said the only thing to fear is fear itself, and especially with the diseases, we should be prepared and not give in to fear. One of my great mentors said that fear is the fire that fuels the furnace of disease. And we shouldn't have to fear disease. We should be prepared and really value our health now before we get sick. And that is really the key.
That's well said. And where can people find you, Dr. Tapper, and the kids that you're describing?
I've been deleted 6 times off Instagram, these communistic platforms. They don't like the truth being told out there. They don't like when people speak truth to power, especially. But you can find me on Instagram. Just type in Dr. Ben Tapper. I'm sure there's a few other knockoff accounts on there, but the one with the most followers, that's me. You can find me on Twitter, or X, Dr. Ben Tapper. And also, we are going to be offering telemedicine through and telehealth through the Wellness Company. So go to the Wellness Company. You can search that, and that's where I'm at.
Fantastic. And Brian first, and then JJ, where can people find you, and how do they locate the things that you want them to know about?
Oh, sure. Well, you can find me at DailyClout.io. Over at Unrestricted Invasion, just look for the tab. You'll see me and JJ and glaring at you. And then on Twitter, I'm right there at Brian O'Shea SPI, on Getter, at Brian O'Shea, and on Substack at Brian O'Shea, or Investigate Everything.
And how about you, JJ?
You can find me at jjcarroll.com. I wrote a book called titled Invaded. It's on there. And I'm right with Brian on DailyClout.io and jjcarroll14 on X. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Of
course. Thank you.
This has been I want to thank all of you gentlemen, and especially you, Dr. Tapper. This has been an incredible wake-up call, very sobering with the experience and knowledge that Brian has and that JJ has and that you have, Dr. Tapper. We're looking at 360 degrees of, oh, heck, what's coming down the road? Well, I'm not going to be scared. I'm going to face it, and I can face it because I'm prepared. So I want to thank all of you. All of you have, made me think about things I never would have thought about. And I'm sure that's true of all the people watching this. And I also want to chime in and say, everyone support the Wellness Company. Dr. Tapper is not kidding. There are very few companies out there who are not only supporting dissident voices, alternative voices around health and wellness, but also actually providing solutions. And I personally feel better knowing that we have a medical kit. I'm going to order that contagion kit and the travel kit, because I am persuaded by what I heard today. And you can help us and help the Wellness Company, which is really important, by going, and help yourselves by going to twc.health, promo code DailyClout. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Dr. Tapper. Thank you, gentlemen. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, it's Dr. Naomi Wolf of DailyClout, and I want to give a heartfelt thanks to our wonderful partners at the Wellness Company. Many of us these days are looking for ways to maintain or regain our health in the presence of the spike protein that's circulating among us. Mainstream sources, of course, rarely offer the answers we're looking for, but we're lucky to have dedicated truth-seeking doctors such as Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and their amazing team at the Wellness Company who offer their products and who are our sponsor. Most of these doctors are often asked, how can I detox from the spike protein, from the vaccine, or from COVID itself? The Wellness Company does offer a solution designed by Dr. McCullough called Spike Support Formula. designed to address spike proteins within the body, helping people recover from the damage of spike proteins. And people are reporting that they are recovering pre-COVID and pre-vaccine vitality. It's a time now when uncertainty is lurking everywhere. Preparedness is no longer an option at the margins, it's 100% necessary. And that's where the Wellness Company's Medical Emergency Kit comes in. The Wellness Company's Medical Emergency Kit contains crucial medications such as ivermectin, emergency antibiotics such as amoxicillin, antivirals, Z-Pak. The kit is backed by the expertise of the Wellness Company and their team of renowned medical professionals, including Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. James Thorpe, Dr. Harvey Risch, Dr. Drew Pinsky, and other truth-seeking, truth-telling doctors. They have created a kit that sets the gold standard for safety and prevention, the ultimate preparedness solution. Don't wait for a medical crisis to catch you or your family off guard. Visit DailyCloutHealth.com and use promo code DailyClout for an exclusive 10% discount. Take charge of your preparedness and enjoy peace of mind. And please do support our wonderful sponsors, the Wellness Company.